Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. I'm Hugh Fullerton.
I'm Morgan Jeffrey.
And this week I'm not introducing by saying my names. I thought I'd just shake it up a little bit. And this week we're also talking about a little plot hole in Doctor Who lore, which has been getting a bit of attention recently, and we've written about before. Basically, we're talking about the Master's missing regenerations, or kind of missing plot holes and gaps in the Master's life. Most specifically, talking about what happened between the last time we saw Michelle Gomez's version of the character, Missy, in 2017, and when we met Sacha Dhawan's version, the Master, again, in 2020. Because, yeah, basically, I mean, Morgan, I don't know if you want to explain this, but some people kind of have some questions about what happened between those two versions, don't they?
Well, I think because Michelle Gomez's incarnation famously went through this redemption arc, didn't she? And despite all her protests that she would never turn good, that is pretty much what Missy ended up doing. She ended up siding with the Doctor and then apparently being killed permanently, which death usually is permanent, but not always for Doctor Who and rarely for the Master. Was permanently killed by her previous incarnation, John Sims' Master. So then when the Sacha Dhawan Master materialized, no pun intended, fans were, with very little explanation as to how you got from point A to point B, fans were wondering, well, how did Missy survive to become Dhawan's Master? Why is the Master now back to his old wicked ways when Missy had gone on this redemption arc? So some fans argued that potentially the Sacha Dhawan Master isn't the next stage on from Missy, that he's an earlier incarnation from some point earlier in the Master's timeline. And now I believe there's another wrinkle to this already quite complicated backstory, right?
There is. So recently, Big Finish, who do audio spin-offs of Doctor Who and get a few mentions in this podcast, released a second series of Michelle Gomez as Missy in the Missy Chronicles or something like that. And basically, yeah, it's got a title. I've got the title here. It is it's just called Missy Series 2. So yeah, in Missy Series 2, basically Missy's up to her old tricks, and she's trying to do all sorts of evil stuff to get the attention of the Doctor, and she thinks she's met the Doctor, a female version of the Doctor, which, you know, we can kind of be interested in. But this person, played by Gina McKee, says, no, I'm not the Doctor, I'm you, dun dun dun. And basically it turns out that she's calling herself the Lumiat and is a good version of the Master, basically, kind of like they explicitly say, kind of like the Valeyard to the Doctor, where that was all the Doctor's bad bits. This is basically all the Master's good bits. Actually, Missy kind of makes the point that actually the Doctor's not as bad as the Lumiat, in that he or she's not as good, because the Doctor at least has some like inner conflict and a dark side, whereas the Lumiat is pure like sweetness and light. This is kind of interesting because basically the creator of the series, the writer of this episode, Lisa McMullen, has specifically said she wanted to kind of fill in the gap at the end of Missy's thing. He said, I wanted to create a story that could possibly fill in the gap between Missy's last telly appearance and the Master's spectacular TV return. The Lumiat is canon, I say so. The Lumiat is the tale of what happens to the Time Lord known as Missy / the Master between Gomez and Dhawan, with the caveat that I wrote this before I knew there was a Master in Dhawan form. So basically, Big Finish, the canonicity of, is a bit questionable. Obviously, the Night of the Doctor did say some Big Finish stories are canon because Paul McGann's Doctor noted that. So, you know, we can kind of take this how we want. But yeah, basically, the Lumiat suggests that after Missy, there was an incarnation of the Master who was good. And I'm probably going to give some spoilers here. So spoilers if you want to listen to Lumiat, and maybe skip ahead a minute or something. Basically, at the end of the story, Missy finds out that the Lumiat exists because at the end of World Enough and Time / The Doctor Falls, when she was dying, she did this thing called an Elysium field, where you can kind of create a new cycle of regenerations.
Of course you can.
Yeah. Morgan's looking at me with disbelief. You can create the new cycle of regenerations and purge yourself of certain personality traits, with the idea being that Missy tried to purge herself of all her bad traits, trying to be purely good, and creates this Lumiat figure played by Gina McKee, who is like a good version of the Master. Or possibly, it's slightly ambiguous, she was trying to purge all the good from herself and it went wrong and she ended up creating this Lumiat figure. Yeah, so there's kind of a different side of it. And then basically the end of the story, Missy kind of gets sick of the Lumiat and kills her, hoping to make her regenerate, dumps her in the back of Beyond and sort of says, oh, I wonder what you'll end up like next time. Ha, 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 ha. So there's a possible explanation there as to why Missy went to Sacha Dhawan. I would say, though, it doesn't, like the writer says, it doesn't specifically say that's what happens. We don't see the Lumiat turn into Sacha Dhawan. Obviously, Big Finish can't kind of play around with the main series as it's airing on TV. So it kind of leaves it up to interpretation.
But it does throw up another possibility, right? Because a lot of fans, the main reason why they were arguing that Sacha Dhawan, because on paper it seems like a mad twist to throw in there, right? Why not just have Dhawan be the next chronological incarnation? That's the simplest explanation. But understandably, some fans were upset. They said that Missy had gone through this redemption arc, because the whole issue of Missy was killed isn't so much of an issue, because the Master is repeatedly killed in inverted commas and comes back.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. It's Doctor Who. That doesn't matter. But Missy having gone through this redemption arc and become good, some fans then saw it as a betrayal of the character for Sacha Dhawan's Master to, as I say, be back to his wicked ways and scheming and so on. So one theory was that he was a previous incarnation who hadn't yet gone through that redemption. But this then throws up another possibility, this Big Finish story, if you take that to be canon, which is that in expunging all her good qualities into this new character played by Gina McKee, potentially when she came to regenerate next, Missy had expunged all those qualities and so became the purely evil, if you like, Master again. So it's another theory, it's another option.
Yeah. Also, there's a possibility that she does become the Lumiat, Gina McKee, next, and then the Lumiat becomes Sacha Dhawan, having, like you say, kind of pushed all the good bits into one incarnation, being slightly lacking in them the next time around. Also,
Missy was kind of like a balance, and then she went too far into the good, and then kind of recoiled from that and became the Sacha Dhawan Master.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think basically what some people maybe wanted with Sacha Dhawan's Master was a kind of acknowledgement of, like, I know I was a bit better, but now I'm bad again. I did see there was someone citing, there's a Doctor Who comic where Jodie's doctor meets Missy or something like that, and basically she says something like, oh yeah, she's a friend of mine who she's been doing a lot better, but she's kind of gone back to her old ways or something. And people were saying, like, even that kind of acknowledgement would have been, like, nice. I did think when I watched Spyfall Part 2, when the Master says something like, Doctor, I get a little buzz when I kill them across my hearts, it's like I felt like I'm doing what I was born to do, what I'm meant to do. This was definitely my reading into it, but I was like, you could almost read that as him saying, I was denying myself before, this is me being more like I am now. But it is interesting how open the series leaves it. Like you say, I mean, when people talk about he could be the Master before Missy, or, people saying he could be a pre-John Sim / Derek Jacobi Master, there's lots of options. I mean, the thing that always makes me wonder is that when John Sim's Master dies at the end of The Doctor Falls, we don't see him become Missy. The kind of episode suggests that's what's going to happen. He just goes off into his TARDIS, dying, kind of laughing evilly. And the next time we see Missy, previously to that, she is kind of operating without a TARDIS. And John Sim's Master has a TARDIS. Sacha Dhawan's Master has a TARDIS. Missy doesn't. So I'm kind of wondering where it went. Like, right. Why doesn't Missy have one if John Sim had one and was turning into someone else while he went down into a TARDIS that we didn't see? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So again could be evidence that Dhawan comes between Sim and Michelle Gomez's Missy.
I just love the idea of at the end him regenerating into Missy and that being like the big twist. Like, and then you see Jodie Whittaker's Doctor with Missy, and then Missy goes back to do all the Peter Capaldi stuff.
Wow.
I think that'd be really cool.
That would be a great twist if we see Sacha Dhawan turn into Missy. But that is just one example, right, of various not really plot holes, but gaps in the Master's personal history that exist throughout Doctor Who. Recently with the Timeless Children, when it kind of rewrote, as some fans saw, the Doctor's backstory, there was a little bit of backlash to that from some quarters of fandom, mostly because we feel as though we know. Ironically, for a show called Doctor Who, we kind of know every single aspect of the Doctor's past lives, right? We've followed the Doctor from 1963 to now, and even where there were previously gaps, say like between the Eighth Doctor and the Ninth Doctor, Doctor, and there was some ambiguity there in terms of the Doctor's personal history. They later went back and filled that in. So you know, and popped another incarnation in there for good measure. So we saw, you know, we don't know everything that happened, but we saw the Eighth Doctor become the War Doctor. We saw the War Doctor sort of become the Ninth Doctor.
Yeah.
That you know, you can link all those things up. Whereas the Master's timeline across Doctor Who is nowhere near as complete. It's a lot more patchwork. There's a lot more holes that you could fill in. So Roger Delgado's Master, there's nothing to suggest necessarily that he is the first Master. We then don't see him become the kind of rotting corpse version of the character that we see next in The Deadly Assassin, played by Peter Pratt. So it's not even clear if that's meant to be a version of Roger Delgado's Master who's just had, you know, a really rough time of things, or if that's a different incarnation. And then when you know, we haven't actually seen that many of the Master's regenerations. I think the only on-screen, I might be wrong, but I think the only on-screen regeneration we've actually seen for the Master is from Derek Jacobi to John Sim, because there's a lot of body snatching that goes on elsewhere, where Anthony Ainley's Tremas has his body stolen by the Geoffrey Beevers Master and then becomes the Anthony Ainley Master. Similarly, that weird snake thing that the Master had become for some reason in the TV movie possesses the body of Bruce the paramedic, played by Eric Roberts. So there's lots of gaps, and you don't see that many of the Master's regenerations actually occur on screen.
No, you don't. And like, it's quite interesting. I think it's quite appropriate, really, because obviously we followed the Doctor's story, right? I think part of the reason that we don't see the Master's regenerations is because they can constantly do the but they're secretly the Master twist that we saw. You know, we kind of saw with Derek Jacobi, we saw with John Sim in that we'd have Mr. Saxon tease for a while. We saw it with Missy, obviously, and we saw it most recently with Sacha Dhawan.
There's always some ambiguity as well as to whether or not, a bit of back and forth as to whether or not Time Lords can recognise each other.
I mean, with David Tennant's thing, it's like, oh yeah, I definitely know as soon as I saw, you know, the Master, I can sense another Time Lord. And then with Jodie Whittaker's version, and she's just hanging out and texting for ages, and then hangs out with him for like 3 days. When he's like, oh, I'm the Master, and she's like, oh, all right.
And like with Utopia, you can kind of make the argument that because the Master had used the chameleon arch, that was why the 10th Doctor didn't recognise the Derek Jacobi Master. But with the 13th Doctor not recognising the Dhawan Master, doesn't make a huge lot of sense given what we know. But it wouldn't be Doctor Who if it wasn't contradicting its own, you know, past established lore. So.
Exactly, yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense considering that we follow the Doctor. And the Master is another time-traveling Time Lord who can change his face or her face. It makes sense that we wouldn't necessarily meet these incarnations in the right order, and we wouldn't necessarily know when we met them. We wouldn't see all of it. I think that's part of the fun, is that because, I mean, the point of the Master is to slightly invert a lot of things we know and like about the Doctor, right? And I feel like the kind of big sort of regeneration, sort of emotional changeover is sort of twisted in the Master in that it's always a surprise. You know, it's always like so it should always anyway, I think, be a surprise. Like the Doctor is like a big thing, you know, it's announced, like it's talked about, everyone knows who the next Doctor is going to be. With the Master, I think it's part of the fun that we don't know. I also think that, as you say, a lot of times he doesn't have like proper regenerations because he's sort of such a sort of strange twisted figure who kind of just is always escaping death. Like, does Bruce count? I mean, I know that Eric Roberts does count as the Master, but like it's a human body with like a Time Lord snake in it, like as you say. And you know, there's like a couple of corpse Masters wandering around, and there's like a Master played by Gordon Tipple who we never properly meet, who is, you know, vaporized. And it's like, is that supposed to be the Ainley Master, or is it supposed to be another Master? You know, I think Big Finish has made the argument that it is meant to be a different Master, because I think they've gotten Gordon Tipple to do a couple of things. And then, the Masters had multiple regeneration cycles and things like that. So, and actually, you know, talking Big Finish, we mentioned the Lumiat, but it's not the first time they've invented versions of the Master, new versions. Obviously, Mark Gatiss plays a version from like a parallel universe, I think. And Alex McQueen from The Inbetweeners and The Thick of It, among other things, plays a Master in Big Finish. And I think someone's sort of tried to work out the second regeneration cycle. I was doing air quotes there, but you can't see because this is audio. And based on when the Master was revived for the Time War and fought in it, they basically said that the second regeneration cycle Master was Alex McQueen, then a young version of the War Master, then the War Master, which is the Derek Jacobi one, whose adventures have been kind of extended within Big Finish, then the John Sim Master, then the Missy Master, then the Lumiat, then the Dhawan Master. So that's the kind of, basic version. But there's questions within that, like, obviously Big Finish has created this backstory for the Derek Jacobi Master, which we didn't see. But there's a question of, did that Master in the world of a TV series exist? Was the Professor Yana figure, was that Master existing, looking like that and thinking like that? Or, did the Master regenerate into a child who grew up as human and then became the Master, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no. Because I assumed when I watched Utopia that the Master had reverted to child form when he had used the Chameleon Arch, grown up on Utopia or in that form, and grown into the form of old Derek Jacobi. And when Big Finish announced they were doing these War Master adventures with Derek Jacobi, a lot of fans had made the same assumption, had similar questions as to, well, I thought that he was a child and grew up, so how can he be consciously the Master and be an adult Derek Jacobi? And they've since gone in and sort of introduced this new backstory where no, there was a sort of a child Master played by a different actor who then grew up to be the Derek Jacobi War Master, who then used the Chameleon Arch to then become the sort of human Professor Yana, which is fine. It's just another interpretation of it. But you're right in that with the Master there is that freedom to, because regeneration is such a great concept, but arguably the one thing that you can't do with that concept with the Doctor, as you said, is have that kind of fun element of surprise. I've always seen people say stuff like, wouldn't it be fun if we didn't know who the next Doctor was going to be until they regenerated? Or wouldn't it be fun if there was a story where a relaunch of the series where you didn't know who was playing the Doctor, until similarly, they go, haha, I'm the Doctor, I was the Doctor all along. But that's impossible to do because of the machine around Doctor Who. Of course, you have to announce who's playing the role and so on. It'd be great for the story, but it wouldn't work in terms of the production. But with the Master, you can do that because you don't necessarily need to do a big press release and a big show on BBC One announcing who's playing the Master. It'd be interesting, but I don't know if it would get the same kind of ratings.
I think we sort of knew, and this sort of science played around that as well. Like, we sort of knew John Sim was going to be the Master. I think that had been kind of revealed, but I don't think we knew the whole Derek Jacobi side of it. We didn't know Derek Jacobi was also playing the Master, so we still did kind of get to have that fun twist.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think we knew Sim was playing the Master, but not how he would be introduced, and not that Derek Jacobi was the Master. So we didn't know. And again, as you were saying, it does make sense that we wouldn't, with the Doctor, he's the character we follow, or he or she is the character we follow at all times. So it makes sense to a certain extent that you know all of their backstory, although now apparently we don't. But with the Master, it being a time traveler on a different path to the Doctor, it makes sense that we don't know everything, and that. I think although the books and the audios have played around with this a little bit, within the context of the TV series, the Master and the Doctor pretty much always meet in order. Now, if these are two time travelers zipping about time and space independently of each other, what the odds of them constantly meeting in the right order in terms of their own personal timelines, it must be infinitesimal. There's no way that would happen. So, although I look at the idea that the Dhawan Master comes before Missy and say, well, that's for a layman, for a non-fan, that's ludicrously complicated. I don't think they would go that route. In terms of within the fiction of the show, it actually does make more sense that the Doctor would meet a Master out of time, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, that out of time thing you mentioned, obviously that is kind of what they did with River Song. They had that kind of two people on different timelines meeting, and I guess they did technically do it with John Sim in World Enough and Time Doctor Falls, in that he's a 10th Doctor Master who meets Peter Capaldi's Doctor, although technically that wasn't quite out of sequence, in that kind of that was after the last time we'd seen him. For John Sim Master, we'd seen him
no, for John Sim that makes perfect sense. It's just the next Doctor along for him to meet, right?
Yeah, poor Matt Smith never got a look in.
No, as far as we know, there's always room for novels and comics and Big Finish. But
yeah, no, I think it's something that I get why the series doesn't play around with it more, because it's confusing enough as it is. But
yeah,
you know, it makes sense that the one person who did play around with it a little bit is Stephen Moffat, because he was always kind of a bit more free to mess around with that stuff. But I mean, fundamentally, that kind of takes me to the one thing I always think whenever I see theories about any masters, or specifically the Sacha Dhawan Missy kind of mystery, is what's the easiest thing for the show to kind of communicate? You know, what is the thing that people are going to get? And the easiest thing to communicate is just, oh yeah, it's for next master. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just I would be surprised if this era of the show would go into the kind of level of detail and depth that would kind of explain exactly what happened to Missy and how she became Sacha Dhawan.
I don't expect it to be addressed on TV at all, at least not definitively. And if it is, I don't expect them to go the route of, even though it's an interesting theory, I don't expect them to go the route of saying, oh, you know that other incarnation you met? No, I'm the one before that, because it's to get that across, you know, on a Sunday night BBC One. It's too complicated. Although I've said this before, and then Doctor Who just totally
That's true.
me.
I mean, Captain Jack coming back would be ridiculous. They'd never do that.
Yeah, exactly. So who knows? You know, we can't predict these things. But I feel like the simplest path is simply for Sacha Dhawan to be the next one in line after Michelle Gomez, even if it makes not a huge amount of sense within the context of the show. But the important thing to remember is as well, like regeneration. Famously, I think the idea basically is that a Time Lord is always more or less the same person. It's not like a whole new personality, because the Doctor is always essentially the same person. But what regeneration does, it kind of like jumbles up your brain a little bit and then scatters it in all different directions. And so certain personality traits that you have are kind of heightened, and other ones are played down, which, you know, we all have like different personality traits. We're all different people at different times. So when the Doctor regenerates, he or she might become slightly more goofy than he was before, or slightly more serious than they was before, or slightly more reckless, or slightly more cautious, and so on. And so there's nothing to say that having experimented with being good, just the simple process of regenerating caused Missy to become the kind of traditional master again. There's nothing to say that regeneration didn't just jumble her brain and make her revert to form. That's a perfectly valid explanation.
Well, Missy was a little bit like the Delgado master, right? It was kind of more of a sort of like, you know, kind of frenemies thing, you know, kind of like really, really valued the Doctor as much as, like, wasn't really ever out to destroy the Doctor, just kind of kill his friends and kind of get his attention. Whereas the Dhawan master seems to have a lot more hate and be a bit sort of less hinged, shall we say. And that was maybe a little bit more like, you know, the Ainley master or the John Sim master. Like, you know, these things kind of come in waves, and sometimes they're reactions to each other. And like you said, I mean, the thing is, the show's never going to turn Sacha Dhawan into Missy, because it would just be confusing. People at home would be like, but she was already, that was before, right?
I've also seen people argue that Missy should be considered the last ever incarnation of the Master, where the Master has kind of reached the end of her life and has decided to reform. And so so as you don't undo Missy's death, that is the final, again, the final death. But that is genuinely the end. And so Dhawan, that's why Dhawan comes before. But then, you know, all being well, fingers crossed, as much as I love Sacha Dhawan as the Master, at some point there will probably be another incarnation of the character, another take. And so, because that's it's the classic format, that character will probably be an antagonist to the Doctor. So at what point do you draw the line and say, okay, we've fitted in 6 masters now between, you know, pre-Missy, this is starting to get ridiculous, which again is why I don't think they'll go that route. I think, you know, like it or not, I do think Sacha Dhawan comes after Michelle Gomez, and there are now a variety of theories and explanations that you can take on board as to why that makes sense and why it's not a total betrayal of this character arc. It's just go listen to Big Finish and it'll explain it all. It's fine.
Exactly. And the thing is, you know, there's so many avenues that Big Finish and, you know, comics and people's can go down, because, you know, we've seen like 7, 8 on-screen masters technically. We've seen way more Doctors, but the Master has had more lives. We know the Masters, you know, run through at least one cycle already. I mean, the Master's had more on-screen lives, technically. Or, I don't know now, because the Doctor's had loads of lives, but you get what I mean. So, you know, there's definitely kind of ways for things to go. I will kind of end on something earlier this year at the Radio Times covers party, when we were able to go to parties and things like that. We spoke to Stephen Moffat about this. We kind of said, you know, you wrote Missy's last episode, you've seen Sacha Dhawan now. You know, what do you think about the gap and stuff? And he basically said kind of what we've been saying, that he thinks it shouldn't be explained because he thinks that's for the kids and for people to kind of have fun with, right? To kind of come up with solutions and kind of create their own stories in the gaps and not explain absolutely everything, because that's part of it, right? Is the slight ambiguity. And I think if you try and explain absolutely everything, you end up with, you know, here's a TV show about the Doctor growing up as a teenager on Gallifrey. Like, it's
which no one wants.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, I think Stephen Moffat is smart enough and gracious enough that if he wrote Missy's redemption arc, right? He wrote that in, again, in inverted commas, final end to her story. But if someone suggested to him that, oh, I'm not going to bring the Master back ever as a villain because you did that, he would say, don't be ridiculous. But I would imagine he would say, well, that's ridiculous. No, of course, bring back the Master. It's fine. Like, the Master is the Master. That's what that character does. And I think he's a big fan of Sacha Dhawan's take on the character. So if the man who wrote it doesn't mind, like, maybe it's okay for Missy's arc to have gone that way, for the Master's arc to have gone that way.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, or we can just think about the idea that if the Doctor had just kept Missy in the vault all that time, maybe all the people Sacha Dhawan killed would still be alive. But we won't think about that.
It's like Batman and the Joker. Batman just ended the Joker. They're like, Batman's as responsible for the Joker's crimes. And similarly, it's the Doctor Master. It's the Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty.
It's very true. Well, listen, those are our theories for some of the gaps and stuff. If you've got any thoughts on, you know, how Missy turned into Sacha Dhawan's Master, or how anything else fits in, please do, you know, let us know in the comments. You know,
this is it. If there wasn't any ambiguity, we'd have nothing to talk about.
It's true.
Which would be a tragedy. So that's another reason why these things should be left open-ended and ambiguous.
Yeah, for us and for you to put your thoughts out there. Let us know what you think. I mean, to be honest, so often when we talk about this stuff, you guys in the comments come up with stuff that's much more intelligent and interesting than what we've talked about. So, you know, we'll just look at that and then pass it off as our own opinions. So next time we do this, we won't really. You can trust us.
We'll credit you if we do.
We will credit you. But yeah, you can read more about Sacha Dhawan and Missy and the Master and things like that on the Radio Times website. We've got a piece about the Lumiat, which will be available to read. And yeah, we've got loads more Doctor Who stuff and obviously previous editions of this podcast. So if you're done listening to this, maybe listen to one of those and let us know what you thought. For now, I've been Hugh Fullerton.
I've been Morgan Jeffrey.
And you've been listening to the RadioTimes.com Doctor Who podcast. Goodbye.